use some pretty basic but useful scripting operations for 3-matic for anatomic modeling. So here we've got a file of right upper extremity that might look like how you get it out of segmentation. So parts could be, a little bit rough. They could have some segmentation artifacts like stair stepping, or they could have some mesh defects like flip triangles or holes, things like that. Um, they typically come in with these numbers at the end of the object too. And what we're using is Python as the programming language, which works with Dramatic, and we're using VS Code as an API or as an IDE to write our code. Here I'm showing you a script template that could be used essentially as a way to outline your script from beginning to end. Some important features are putting your information on the top as far as the name and date, what version of the script it's on, as far as like keeping track of any changes or change log that you might do between versions, as well as the version that you've developed it for or that it's been validated with. As you create maybe scripts that create medical devices or things like that, you may want to ensure that other people would run the script in only the versions that's been intended for or validated with. So it's maybe important to put that in there as well. Here we've essentially commented what is the purpose of the script, and what are the inputs, what are the outputs, and what does it do, right? For any of the scripts that are developed for 3-matic, you have to import the package of Trimatic, which includes all the functions in the API. And if we look at the here it is. As we look at the 3-matic user interface, this API is reachable by the options and help tab, and click on the scripting guide. This is where we search for any functions that we want to do, and then we would come up with a list of functions we could click on, copy and paste these functions into our IDE for use. So I'll show you one that we've made that will essentially do a series of functions on all of the parts. So, and that includes, reducing triangles, smoothing, turning them all a specific color. So maybe if it's all bones, we turn them all bone-like color. We fix them all, so it gets rid of the mesh errors. We duplicate the original objects. That's a good practice to have when you're, first starting with scripting, and as you're developing a script, to duplicate the original parts, keep them separate, and then when the script fails and you're just kind of running it over and over again, you can just get rid of the parts that were used in the functions, and you can still retain your original batch of parts. That could be useful for any workflow. Then at the bottom here, we're just demonstrating that you could have things like get selection as a function, which will enable a user to pick a part to have certain functions applied to that part. So what we're doing initially is, if we want to do functions on all of the parts, we have to get a list of all of the parts, and this is the function that does that. Traumatic.getParts will give us a list of all the parts. So what we're going to do is just copy these functions, and we can go paste them into the console over here, and we'll see that it returns a list of all of our parts here. So I've got all the parts and printed it out, and here's the list. The next thing we need to do is, if we're doing some functions on on a list of parts, we need to do a for loop. The for loop will say for whatever piece, this could be any word. We just write part because it makes sense. But for that item in, or the index value in the list of all parts, and then write a colon, and then when you hit enter, it will indent one line. Then you can write whatever functions you want to happen to that index value. So it starts on the first item in the list, does everything in the loop, and then goes to the second item in the list and does everything in the loop, etc. So here we're making a part visible. We're duplicating the original part. And now that what that does is creates the same part at the bottom of the list, the bottom of the bottom of the object tree. It's not in any list yet, and it's not assigned to any variables yet. And it creates the same part, but the name is underscore duplicate. So I'll do that manually with, say, the ulna here. If I hit Control D, which is the shortcut to do that, you'll see what it does. Creates a new part underscore duplicate. Great. Then we're running some basic functions like reducing the number of triangles, smoothing the mesh, and auto fixing the mesh. And then it changes the color of that part to something that looks like a bone color. And you notice it's kind of weird. It's what's supposed to be here is like RGB values, but normalized from a value of 0 to 1. So in order to find out like what the value you actually want in there is, you got to divide each of those RGB values by 255. So if you go into Excel, you can do that and just type out your RGB values, write a formula that divides by 255, and then these are the values that you want for RGB. So just type those in there. If you want to color any object, part.color equals R, comma, G, comma, B in parentheses. Then we're creating another list. Since we've duplicated these parts, we're finding that list of duplicates by finding all the parts that have underscore duplicate in their name. So that returns our list of duplicate parts. And then we're writing a for loop to do something with all of those separately. So one is hiding them. Two is getting rid of the underscore duplicate in the name. So we're doing that with a part.name equals part.name.replace. This is just a regular Python function for replacing some string text. Then we're creating a group and we're putting all of those parts in the list in that group. Okay. After that, we're putting a prompt or a pop-up that says select part to become red. The user can select a part, which will highlight it blue and put a little bounding box around the part so we can see that. After they click OK from that pop-up, it will grab that selection. And we put this little index value of 0 on it because for some reason it will return a list of parts. Even if there's one object, it will basically have a list of one. And if you're trying to color an object, you can't do that for a list without a loop. You have to do it on a single part at a time. So this essentially makes it a single part and not a list. And then we color that object red, which is just 100. So as we're writing functions in our script, if we're writing anything new, you'll see this little white circle up here. And if you want to run it as the whole script, you should hit Control S to save it. Get rid of that. So let's run the script on this set of parts and see what it does. To run the script, we go under the script tab here, hit run script, and then we will find it. So wherever your scripts live. And I've called mine thematic basic functions. Okay, so if we take a look at the logger, see all the functions that happened. So here it found all the parts and returned them, but printed them out. Then it made parts visible, duplicated, reduced, smoothed, fixed, set a color. And it did that in the loop for each of the parts that I found. So it's like 5 different parts. Okay, then it changed the label. So that find that replace did that for all the duplicate parts. So that was started here, hide, change label, hide, change label. And then it made the group of all those duplicate parts at the end, and it titled that folder originals. And all the original parts live in there, and they're also hidden. So here we have a pop-up, which you can see it has allowed me to like click on a bunch of stuff, and we can even run functions right now separately. But that creates kind of a pause in the script, and if we select a specific any part, it will return that part and make it red with this part of the script. So we just do the radius bone, made that red, and then also typed out script completed, indicating that the script is finished running. Um, so yeah, essentially we've shown some basic functions that can be done with scripting. Those functions are, finding parts, getting a list of parts, printing functions, running a for loop on the list, grabbing some functions in the API just by searching for those. After we search, we put in the variable names that we want to run those functions on. Coloring a part, finding parts. So if we want to find parts with something in their name or by a specific name, we can do finding parts plural, and we can use regular expression. This dot asterisk will say basically is a wild card. Anything could be in this place, but we want to find any part with underscore duplicate in its name and something before it. Given that we don't have regular expression indicated after the duplicate, if you have a part that's underscore duplicate and then some other stuff, it may not find those. Replacing part of a part's name. This is inside a loop, but it could be separate as well. Creating a group, putting a message box up, and getting a selected object. Typically, this would be after a message box so that the user has a chance to select a specific object, and the message box is going to tell them what's the object or what kind of object and what's going to happen to it. Yep, so that's basically it. So there's a script with a couple functions that are pretty widely used. Hope that's useful. Thanks.